My name is Ava Miller, and the moment I discovered my husband Ethan Cole's betrayal, I realized the stakes of my life had just skyrocketed. That Sunday morning, waking up to an empty bed and a cruel note on the fridge, "Goodbye, never loved you anyway," felt like a slap in the face. But in truth, I had been expecting something like this. I work as a forensic accountant in Milwaukee, specializing in financial fraud for some of the largest corporations in the Midwest. 15 years of experience have taught me that money always leaves a trail, and no one, not even a loved one, can hide from it forever. Ethan had started showing signs of plotting his escape about 3 months ago. First, he became overly curious about our retirement accounts, a sudden interest after years of letting me handle everything. Then came the secret phone calls, unexplained absences, and the way he'd flip his computer screen whenever I walked into the room. Classic signs of someone planning to disappear. What Ethan didn't realize was that I noticed everything. Every suspicious transaction, every hidden purchase, every attempt to quietly move our money, I tracked it all, documented it, and sent copies to my lawyer. I had prepared for every possible scenario he might attempt, and by the time he left that note, thinking he'd pulled off the perfect escape, I was already in control. The first red flag I had noticed in our personal life wasn't even financial, it was subtle, emotional manipulation. Ethan had a charming, confident demeanor when we first met at a charity gala 6 years ago. He seemed like a man who had his life together, a successful investment advisor, a sleek car, and the kind of charisma that makes people trust him instantly. I was drawn to his ambition, impressed by the way he spoke about building a future together. In hindsight, I should have noticed the gaps in his story. He always deflected questions about clients and his past, and there were countless minor inconsistencies in his anecdotes. The first 3 years of our marriage seemed perfect. We bought a beautiful suburban home, traveled to exotic locations, and even talked about starting a family. But little things didn't add up. The defensive way he dodged questions about student loans, the sudden change of topic when I asked about old colleagues. His words were classic manipulation. "Don't you trust me? Why do you need to know everything?" I let it slide because I believed in him, in us, and in the future we were supposed to be building together. That was my first mistake. Then came the clear signs I couldn't ignore. Last Christmas, Ethan insisted on separate holiday accounts, claiming it would be more romantic if we surprised each other. But the credit card statements he thought he'd hidden told a different story: luxury jewelry I never received, expensive weekend trips with no corresponding conferences, and mysterious calls from unknown numbers that went straight to voicemail when I was around. While most wives might have confronted their husbands immediately, I took a different approach. I began analyzing every transaction, tracking every odd movement of funds. Every attempt he made to drain our accounts actually provided me with more evidence. By monitoring our finances, moving our savings, and preparing legal safeguards, I set a trap he would never see coming. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago. I was working late at the office when my colleague Laura Hayes rushed over, her face pale and trembling. "Ava, you need to see this," she said, holding her phone as if it might bite. I looked at the screen and froze. Ethan's name appeared in a series of suspicious transactions we were investigating, not as a victim, not as a witness, but as a person of interest. Patterns I had been noticing in our personal accounts were emerging in his professional life. He wasn't just planning to abandon me, he was running from something far bigger than a failed marriage. In fact, he had already left a trail across multiple states, and this time, his next target was me. But I was ready. By the time Ethan thought he was 10 steps ahead, he was actually walking straight into my meticulously designed trap. The phone kept buzzing with fraud alerts, declined transactions, failed withdrawals, frozen accounts. Each one was music to my ears. I glanced at a folder on my desk, marked just in case, filled with months of evidence that would destroy his plans and his future. As I listened to his so-called sister Megan's frantic voice on the phone, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Because what Ethan didn't know was that he had underestimated the wrong woman. By the time Monday morning arrived, Ethan had no idea the trap was already set. My phone buzzed relentlessly with notifications, alerts of failed withdrawals, frozen accounts, and flagged transactions. Every step he had taken to secretly access our savings had been recorded, documented, and forwarded to my lawyer. It was a symphony of evidence, and I was conducting every note. 3 months of careful observation had paid off. I had followed the breadcrumbs he left, every jewelry purchase, every secret business lunch, every unexplained withdrawal. He thought he was clever, hiding behind charm and manipulation, but he had underestimated my expertise as a forensic accountant. Money always leaves a trail, and I had memorized his every move. Then came the call from Natalie Parker in Phoenix. I had anticipated this. Her voice was tight with anger and worry. "Ava, your husband, he disappeared with my savings 3 years ago. I've been tracking him ever since." My stomach sank for only a moment. I knew exactly what she was going to say. Ethan, or rather his real identity, had been a con man for years. He moved from state to state, marrying women in finance and then vanishing with their money. And this time, he had chosen the wrong target. Natalie and I spent the next hour comparing notes. Every detail lined up: the charm, the investment advisor persona, the carefully orchestrated withdrawals before disappearing. But unlike his past victims, this time he was facing someone who had anticipated his tactics. I had prepared months in advance, documenting everything, moving our savings into secure accounts, and raiding legal measures. Later that afternoon, I received a text from Ethan: "I'm sorry, can we talk? Just one last time." A perfect predictable move. This was exactly the behavior I had seen in Natalie's case in Phoenix. He reached out, hoping to manipulate his way into access to funds he couldn't steal anymore. I showed the text to Laura, who was helping me monitor every development. Her eyes gleamed as she said, "It's time. Let's set the trap." Downtown, at the small coffee shop we agreed to meet, Ethan was already sitting there when I arrived. He looked disheveled, eyes red as if he had cried, and his clothing slightly wrinkled. The picture of someone trying to appear remorseful, a man believing he had made a terrible mistake. "Ava. I'm so sorry," he began, reaching for my hand across the table. "I've been dealing with some bad investments." I panicked. I pulled my hand back slowly, keeping my expression neutral. Perfect. This was exactly what I wanted him to do, play the role of the desperate husband. "How much trouble are you in, Ethan?" I asked calmly, sliding the folder across the table, labeled evidence. His eyes flickered with hope, thinking I might be fooled. "About $200,000, but I have a plan to fix everything. I just need access to our emergency fund." I pretended to consider it, watching his reactions. "The emergency fund, right? The one you tried to empty yesterday," I said, tone casual. Panic flashed across his face for a moment before he recovered, realizing I wasn't going to fall for his manipulation. I kept my expression neutral, and then, almost casually, I added, "If you'd done your research, you might have realized stealing from a forensic accountant wasn't your smartest move." At that moment, 2 FBI agents, quietly observing, approached the table. I straightened my jacket, letting Ethan take in the scene. Oh, and Ethan, you might want to call a good lawyer. The agents took him into custody, and I watched him being led away. Gone was the confident, charming man who thought he could outsmart me. Now he was a defeated, powerless figure, realizing for the first time that his plans had crumbled. Immediately, my phone buzzed. Laura's voice was triumphant. "We've got him. The offshore accounts, the Ponzi scheme, he isn't just a marriage scammer. This is fraud in the millions." I smiled quietly, thinking about the irony. Every late-night question, every sudden interest in my work, had been part of his plan to exploit my reputation for his next scam. Yet, through careful preparation, I had turned his greed and arrogance against him. As the sun set over Milwaukee, I felt a mixture of relief and satisfaction. Ethan Cole, the man who had attempted to manipulate and steal from me, had just walked straight into the consequences of his actions. And I was ready for whatever came next, the fallout, the legal process, and ensuring no one else fell victim to his schemes. Even after Ethan Cole was taken into custody, the work wasn't over. Arresting him was only the first step. I knew there were others involved, people who helped him execute his schemes, fake relatives, accomplices, and enablers. I needed to map the entire network before anyone could escape justice. The first call that morning came from Laura. "Ava, his so-called sister, Kelly, she's not really his sister." My heart skipped a beat, but only for a moment. I'd suspected as much. Laura continued, "She's been his accomplice for years, running these cons together. She's the one pretending to beg for money, making the scams look believable. She's in Chicago now, and the FBI is on it." I felt a surge of satisfaction. Ethan's carefully crafted stories were unraveling, and his family was nothing but a fiction to manipulate his victims. But I also felt the weight of responsibility. Each of his victims had trusted him, and each had been betrayed. Natalie, Rachel, and the others, they deserve more than just seeing him behind bars. They deserve closure, and I intended to make sure they got it. Then another piece fell into place. My phone buzzed with a message from Rachel Clark, the woman in Phoenix who had been tracking Ethan for years. "Ava, we've located more of his accounts, offshore investments, hidden businesses, even some under different identities. He's been running a massive Ponzi scheme across multiple states." I pinched the bridge of my nose. This was worse than I imagined. Every late-night text, every question about my work, every sudden interest in our finances, it wasn't just greed. It was part of a blueprint for his next scam. I realized then that Ethan wasn't just targeting one woman, he had designed a system to trap multiple victims, using charm and trust to execute a network of cons. I spent the next several hours coordinating with the FBI. Agent Morrison was thorough, cross-referencing our files, verifying transactions, and monitoring all communications. Every call I had made to Natalie, every screenshot I had saved, every bank transfer I had documented, each piece of evidence was now part of a living, breathing case against him. At the same time, I couldn't ignore the personal satisfaction creeping in. I had played the long game, and it had worked flawlessly. Ethan had thought he could manipulate me, steal our money, and vanish without consequences. But I had been anticipating him every step of the way. Every lie he told, every scheme he plotted, every manipulation he tried to use, it had all been meticulously documented, and now, it was turning against him. Then came the call that truly shook me. "Ava, we've identified his real identity," Agent Morrison said. "He's not Ethan Cole. His name is Ethan Reynolds, and he's wanted for fraud in Canada since 2015. I sat back in my chair, letting the information sink in. All the times I had tracked his moves, all the late nights spent analyzing his behavior, it was bigger than I thought. Not just a local con, not just a personal betrayal, but international fraud. And I had him cornered. That night, as I reviewed the evidence on my laptop, I realized something crucial. This wasn't just about getting my money back. It was about protecting others. The same patterns, the same charm, the same manipulative tactics, it was all repeatable. But now, with the FBI, Rachel, and Natalie working together, we had the ability to dismantle the entire network. I couldn't help but think back to that Sunday morning when I had found a note in the fridge, "Goodbye. Never loved you anyway." At the time, it had felt like a dagger to the heart. But in reality, it had been the catalyst. That cruel, careless act had triggered a chain of events that would ensure Ethan Reynolds, and anyone who thought they could manipulate others like him, would never harm another victim again. By the end of the night, I had a new resolve. This wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't even just about justice. It was about creating a system, a network, and a team that could take down con artists like Ethan before they struck again. For me, for his victims, for every woman who might have fallen into his trap, this was personal, and I was ready to fight. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, my mind racing with the strategy for the day. Ethan Reynolds may have been behind bars, but his accomplices were still out there, working to salvage whatever they could from his schemes. Ava Thompson wasn't about to let them slip through the cracks. Agent Morrison called first thing. "Ava, we've got a situation. Kelly, his so-called sister, is at one of the Phoenix properties he used to launder money. We believe she's attempting to access accounts tied to his new shell companies." I grabbed my laptop and began coordinating. Every piece of data, every transaction, every email and text message Ethan had left behind, everything would be traced. "We can't let them erase any evidence," I said firmly. "If they touch even one account, we could lose months of work." Laura chimed in on a conference call, her voice tense but determined. "Ava, I've been cross-referencing old records. Kelly isn't acting alone. There's a man named James Foster. He's been moving money offshore for Reynolds for years. We need to act fast." I felt a familiar thrill, the kind I got when I uncovered a hidden fraud trail. This was exactly what I was trained for, but this time it wasn't just numbers on a page, it was lives, futures, and justice. We planned a coordinated raid, ensuring the FBI had surveillance on all known locations. Every move Kelly and Foster made would be watched. Meanwhile, I had to manage the personal side of things. My savings were safe, but Ethan's victims were anxious and vulnerable. Rachel Clark in Phoenix called repeatedly, her frustration palpable. "Ava, we are trying to protect people while keeping him contained. But Kelly is smart. She knows some accounts aren't frozen yet." I leaned back in my chair, thinking. Smart, yes, but not smart enough. I studied Ethan's patterns, anticipated every step he would take to exploit trust. "Foster isn't thinking straight either," I said. "They're desperate. And desperation makes people sloppy." By mid-morning, the first real breakthrough came. Surveillance footage showed Kelly attempting to enter a property tied to one of Ethan's shell companies. Foster was there too, frantically typing on a laptop. My heart raced, but I kept calm. Everything was being live-streamed to the FBI. Every keystroke, every whispered instruction, every movement, documented. I remembered the note on my fridge from that Sunday morning, "Never loved you anyway." The irony was delicious. That 5-word dagger had triggered an unstoppable chain reaction. Now, Ethan's accomplices were walking right into the trap I had anticipated for weeks. Agent Morrison whispered over the phone, "Ava, they've accessed the account, but all transactions are flagged. We are ready to move in." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Timing was everything. The moment Foster tried to transfer a cent, the FBI would swoop in. And then, it happened. Kelly reached for a folder, thinking she could destroy evidence, thinking she could outsmart the system. But every document she touched was already backed up and monitored. The agents moved silently, surrounding the property. I held my breath as Foster tried to delete files from a laptop. The screen froze. He realized too late what had happened. Within minutes, both Kelly and Foster were in custody. Phones, laptops, and evidence was seized. Every account they touched was frozen, every transaction logged. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and exhaustion. Justice wasn't just a word anymore, it was happening in real time. Rachel called, relief clear in her voice. "Ava, we got them. Everything's secure." I exhaled, leaning back in my chair. Months of planning, careful observation, and anticipation of every possible move had paid off. But there was still work to do. Ethan's network spanned multiple states, and while the core team was captured, we had to ensure no loose ends remained. My phone buzzed with messages from other victims, grateful but shaken. I promised them each that their voices would be heard and their cases would be prioritized. Sitting in my office, I allowed myself a brief moment of satisfaction. For once, the tables had turned. I wasn't the prey. I wasn't the mark. I was the strategist, the one who had orchestrated the downfall of a master manipulator. And I knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. Ethan Reynolds had thought he could control everything, but he had underestimated me. He had underestimated Ava Thompson. And now, with his accomplices captured, the next chapter of justice could begin. The morning of the trial arrived, bright and unforgiving. I adjusted my blazer, taking a deep breath as I stepped into the federal courthouse in Milwaukee. Months of planning, surveillance, and coordination had led to this moment. Ethan Reynolds, the man who had betrayed, manipulated, and stolen, was finally facing the consequences of his actions. His confident smile from our first meeting had long disappeared. Now, he sat slouched at the defendant's table, flanked by his attorneys, glancing nervously at every face in the courtroom. The public gallery was filled with victims, women from multiple states whose lives he had ruined. Each of them carried a quiet but intense presence, their stories ready to be told. I took my seat beside Agent Morrison and Rachel Clark. "Ava, you're about to witness the power of preparation," Rachel whispered. I smiled faintly, knowing just how true that was. Every transaction, every message, every deceitful move Ethan had made was documented. Nothing was left to chance. The prosecution opened with a detailed account of Reynolds' fraud scheme, multiple aliases, international accounts, Ponzi schemes disguised as legitimate investments, and a consistent pattern of targeting successful women. Every detail was backed by the evidence I and my team had painstakingly gathered. When the first victim took the stand, her voice shook, but she recounted Ethan's manipulations with clarity. His charming persona, his carefully orchestrated lies, the false promises, it was all laid bare. Watching him squirm in his seat gave me a grim satisfaction. For once, the predator was the one feeling exposed. Next came Rachel, testifying to the Phoenix case and the months she had spent tracking Ethan's moves. She detailed the meticulous planning involved in uncovering his network. The FBI had presented our surveillance data, showing every attempt by Kelly and Foster to access frozen accounts, every offshore transfer intercepted, every fraudulent move traced. Then it was my turn. I walked to the stand, confident, measured. I recounted the timeline, from the discovery of his first suspicious activity to the moment I had flagged our savings and prepared for the inevitable betrayal. Every emotion, every hesitation, every careful step I had taken was explained. I knew exactly what he was planning, I said, locking eyes with Ethan. I wasn't just protecting myself, I was protecting everyone he intended to hurt. And thanks to careful documentation, every step of his plan has been exposed. The courtroom was silent. Ethan's lawyers tried to interject, but the evidence was overwhelming. Transaction logs, emails, texts, surveillance footage, and witness testimonies created an airtight case. Even his attempts at emotional manipulation, the charm, the apologies, the fake remorse, were catalogued and presented to the judge. Over the course of 3 days, the pattern was clear. Ethan Reynolds had operated a massive, multi-state fraud network, exploiting trust and technology to prey on unsuspecting victims. The jury listened, absorbed the meticulous details, and saw the network of lies for what it truly was. Finally, the sentencing day arrived. I sat quietly as the judge read aloud, Ethan Reynolds, for multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and witness intimidation, this court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison. I caught a glimpse of his face, panic, disbelief, and anger all mixed into one fleeting expression. For the first time, he was powerless. Kelly and Foster had taken plea deals, agreeing to provide evidence in exchange for reduced sentences, but the message was clear: manipulation and deception had consequences. Rachel leaned over and whispered, "Ava, you did it. You didn't just stop him, you dismantled the network." I nodded, a quiet smile on my face. Justice had been served, but more importantly, I had reclaimed my power. As we exited the courthouse, sunlight streaming through the doors, I felt a sense of closure. The man who had once written, "Never loved you anyway," on a note in my fridge now faced a future where every freedom he took for granted had been stripped away. I knew, though, that this was only the beginning. There were still victims who needed help, still systems to improve to prevent con artists like Ethan from striking again. And I was ready. 6 months had passed since Ethan Reynolds' sentencing, but the aftermath of his crimes was still unfolding. Sitting at my new office in downtown Milwaukee, I looked out at the city skyline, sunlight reflecting off the Lake Michigan waters. Life had changed dramatically, not because I'd lost something, but because I'd gained a mission. Agent Morrison had personally called me a few weeks after the trial. "Ava, your skills are exceptional. We need someone like you consulting on financial crimes, specifically romance and investment scams targeting women." I thought about all the sleepless nights tracking Ethan, gathering evidence, connecting the dots. The idea of helping prevent others from being victimized struck a chord. I accepted without hesitation. Within days, I was given access to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division's resources, working alongside analysts, cyber experts, and field agents. Every case file, every suspicious transaction, every prior scam ring became part of my world. And I thrived in it. The first task was reviewing the aftermath of Reynolds' network. Kelly and Foster, his accomplices, had agreed to provide full testimony in exchange for plea deals, detailing every manipulation, every offshore transfer, and every fake identity. That information gave us insight into the operational patterns of con artists, how they target victims, build trust, and execute their schemes. I spent hours cross-referencing our database with bank records, social media activity, and prior FBI reports. Patterns emerged quickly. Successful professional women were often the targets, men posing as charming financial advisors, consultants, or investment brokers, all working the same playbook Ethan had. But now, we had tools and experience to stop them. Rachel Clark became an invaluable partner. Her first-hand experience as a victim, combined with her meticulous documentation, allowed us to anticipate potential moves by other fraudsters. We established a network of survivors, each willing to share details of their experiences to help protect future victims. The project became almost like a modern-day watchtower, spotting predators before they could strike. One afternoon, my phone buzzed with a flag alert: a new suspect, operating in Chicago under multiple aliases, attempting to contact wealthy women through dating apps while pretending to be a financial consultant. My pulse quickened. This was the same MO as Ethan, but smaller scale, yet the same danger. I contacted Agent Morrison immediately. "Ava, we need you on this," she said. "You're the only one who can anticipate their moves in real time. Your experience is unmatched." I set to work. Each profile, every social media post, every financial lead was cross-checked. We identified potential victims and intervened before any money changed hands. By the end of the week, we had not only stopped the scam but had traced the suspect's offshore accounts and identified multiple accomplices. The thrill of it wasn't in vengeance, it was in justice. Each case I solved meant another woman spared the heartbreak, fear, and financial ruin I had once faced. My life had shifted from surviving a betrayal to actively dismantling networks of deception, one case at a time. Even my personal life had transformed. I moved into a new apartment with a home office equipped for secure investigations, hired a small team of trusted analysts, and reconnected with friends I'd almost lost while immersed in the Reynolds case. My family's support was unwavering now that they'd seen the strength and precision with which I handled the situation. Every now and then, I'd get a text or call from someone saying, "You saved me before it even began." Those words were the real reward, far more satisfying than any monetary recovery. I had turned my trauma into purpose, and it gave me energy, focus, and clarity. The lesson I had learned was clear: con artists never sleep, but neither do the people determined to stop them. My mission had become bigger than myself. And as I watched the sun dip below the lake horizon, I knew that my work had just begun. The following weeks felt like a whirlwind. Every morning I woke to alerts of new scams, new victims, and new predators trying to replicate Ethan Reynolds' patterns. But this time, I was ready. My team, Rachel Clark, and I had established a tight network with the FBI and other financial institutions, sharing intelligence, monitoring suspicious activity, and intercepting fraud before anyone lost their life savings. It wasn't easy. Some con artists were brilliant, charismatic, methodical, and relentless. But none had underestimated me again. The sting of betrayal I'd felt from Ethan had sharpened my instincts. I could see the breadcrumbs they left for themselves: patterns in account activity, repeated excuses, small inconsistencies in their stories. It was like following a trail of ants back to the nest. One particularly tense morning, I got a tip about a new operator in Toronto, using multiple aliases and attempting to target professional women through dating apps. The alert came from one of our network survivors who had recognized his profile from an earlier attempt to contact her. I immediately coordinated with Canadian authorities, providing our compiled evidence, including known patterns from Ethan's operation. Within 48 hours, the suspect was apprehended. Every arrest, Every intervention reinforced a lesson I'd learned: knowledge is power. The predators thrive on secrecy, manipulation, and exploiting trust. But when the web of lies was illuminated, there was nowhere to hide. It wasn't about revenge, it was about protection, justice, and preventing heartbreak for others. Meanwhile, I finally allowed myself to breathe. My apartment, overlooking Lake Michigan, had become both a sanctuary and a command center. The mornings were spent analyzing cases and the evenings reconnecting with my friends, who reminded me that life wasn't just about work. I even started mentoring younger women in finance and law enforcement, teaching them how to spot financial red flags and protect themselves. Then came the crowning moment: the Reynolds Network's remaining assets and aliases were fully traced. We identified multiple fake corporations, offshore accounts, and accomplices across 5 states and Canada. The FBI coordinated a nationwide sweep, and I was in the center, providing critical evidence and testifying in real time. Brandon Roberts and his accomplices would never harm anyone again. On the day of the final court hearing, I sat in the courtroom quietly, observing as the judge reviewed the charges against the last remaining operatives. The evidence was irrefutable. The network had been dismantled, every account frozen or reclaimed, every victim notified. My satisfaction wasn't in seeing them punished, but in seeing the justice system work efficiently to protect innocent people. As the proceedings ended, Rachel leaned over and whispered, "You've done more than anyone could imagine, Ava. You didn't just survive, you built an army against people like him." I smiled, thinking about how far I'd come, from the shock of discovering Ethan's betrayal to orchestrating an entire operation to dismantle his empire. Later that evening, I stood on my balcony, the wind off Lake Michigan brushing my face. The city lights sparkled below, and for the first time in years, I felt completely in control of my life. I had rebuilt not only my financial security but my confidence, my purpose, and my power. The betrayal that had once threatened to destroy me had instead given me clarity and mission. I thought about the other victims, how many of them had been too afraid or too confused to fight back. Now, they had a network, a support system, and someone watching their backs. That was my true victory. The revenge was satisfying, yes, but the legacy I was leaving, protection, empowerment, and justice, was far greater. Ava Thompson wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a strategist, a protector, and a warrior for justice. And as the sun set over Milwaukee, painting the sky in golden hues, I knew one thing for certain: betrayal may shape us, but courage and intelligence define us. With that, I turned back inside, ready for the next challenge, the next predator, the next opportunity to ensure that no one would ever underestimate a woman with the knowledge, skills, and determination to fight back. This was more than survival. This was thriving.